Welcome back, beekeepers. Hive Doctor here. Today, now that we're on the other side of wintertime, coming into spring, we still got that transitional period of one season trying to work its way into the next. I thought we'd talk about colony structure. Should we swap boxes? Should we add boxes? What do we do? How do we do it? I'm going to go over 3 of the ways that you can do it. 2 of them you probably heard of, and 1 I'm going to suggest as an alternative, be a more natural way that the bees themselves maintain their own colony structure. So stick around. So one of the common ways that beekeepers structure their colonies coming out of winter, going into that springtime is, let's say they wintered in a single deep hive body. I've done that successfully at my area. You can do that real well. I have found that it's a little bit more difficult to stay on top of them swarming, but it can be done. So what do we do with a single hive body? How do we structure our colony going into spring while our bees are growing and expanding? Well, we got 2 options. One is that we can take the hive cover off. And in this case, we've got our bees here. It's a small colony. I'm going to let them grow into this deep. They're only on 4 to 5 frames. So right now, I'm not actually going to add anything to them. But let's say they were ready for another box to grow into. I could either go ahead and add a box on top, allowing the bees to work their way up. Or I could put a box under, because coming out of winter, bees naturally move from the top back down. So there's not really a right or wrong, but there's definitely a way that you've probably heard to do it, or that you've been doing it yourself, and you're probably adamant about doing it that way, and that's totally cool. I've done both ways, and they both work. Neither one really shot me in the foot or hindered my bees' productivity or the efficiency at which things happened. The second thing that we usually find ourselves dealing with colony structure is, let's pretend that this was a double deep that we went into winter with. In fact, I got one sitting here. I'm going to put on top and pretend like this is what they look like. So, as you all know, I'm sure, you're aware that bees work their way from the bottom box up through the winter, following the food, moving into their food source that we left them. And by the time spring comes around, our bees and brood, our queen, our cluster, they're all up here, now bringing in nectar sources, pollen, and storing it in this top box. And now we pretty much have an empty box on bottom. This cluster, if it's a big colony, they might have crowned down into the top of these frames. If it's a small one, this is going to be an empty box. And so what a lot of beekeepers like to do, I've done it and I've not done it, is come along, take the bees and brood off, take this empty box away, and then put the bees back on, straight onto the bottom board. And then they'll put another box on top so the bees can continue to grow up. So the primary thing here is that no matter what you do, whether it was at method 1 with a single deep or a multi-box setup, is that the beekeeper tends to come along and manipulate things back down, always assuming that bees work up. We always like to take that box of bees and put them down, making our bees work up. But bees don't always work up. And that's where this third potential colony structure you may want to consider comes in mind. So I'm going to show you one I've got on the end of this hive stand here, just as an example, because I have it set up and it's perfect and it's working. So let's look at that. All right, so just to give you an example of what I've got going on in this hive, before we go into describing it, is this is still set up the way I set it up last fall. So I went into the winter and I'm coming out of winter with this setup. So what I've got is my bottom board, a medium honey super, deep hive body, and another medium honey super. So the original structure of this colony was actually just a deep with bees and brood, and then here were their honey stores on the very top. I came in and I added a box of empty, drawn out comb on the bottom of them. That's not something I've ever done before. And I'll explain why I did it here in a second. Right now, The situation is that my colony cluster is exactly where we would expect it to be, right up top here. And in fact, it's just big enough that they're actually crowning just into the deep hive body just a little bit. Here, go ahead and take a look. Here we go. This is my quilting box on top. Just gonna tilt it up. And so I can see already the whitening of comb from the incoming nectar. They're freshening it up. I've got bees from the outside here to this frame right here. I've got 9 frames in this 10 frame box, and they're on 8 frames. And they look really good. All right, let's shut that down. Now, as you can imagine, with all the years I've been in beekeeping, I have this feeling inside of me, this almost instinct that I need to come and put these bees down here and allow them to grow up into the deep, swap boxes around like what we were talking about in the beginning of the video, the same thing that all of us do when we're coming out of winter going into the springtime. But I'm going to resist that urge this time and leave them as they are, and I'll tell you why. I want you to imagine that this comb, as you see it in this medium box, this deep, and this medium box, were in the cavity of a tree. And they made this much comb in a hollow tree, all right? So they naturally would have started down here, worked their way up through winter, and they would be exactly where they are right now, clustered up here, just dipping down into the deep, the same way that they would be in a natural hollow out of nature somewhere, a feral colony. In nature, the bees don't have beekeepers to come along and swap boxes around for them. No, the bees will now, as it warms up, and they bring in pollen and store it, they'll turn that pollen into brood, so to speak, and the queen will begin to push down. And she and the cluster will work their own way down without me having to come along and manipulate that. That's how they do it out in nature. Like I said, there's no beekeeper to swap things around for them, so they already have all this empty comb down here that they built the previous year, and they're going to work their way down into it. So bees will actually work their way up through winter, back down in the spring. They're aware of what they have available, and they ebb and flow just like the seasons, just like moon cycles, you name it. Bees do it too without that manipulation that we normally do as beekeepers. So I'm going to let them do it. And what's going to happen is that they're going to move into this deep, they're going to lay brood. The brood up here is going to emerge as fully grown adults. But now the queen's down here laying. She's not up here laying anymore. And as that brood emerges, they're going to backfill it with honey. And then once they get down here and they've started growing, they're going to start putting away nectar up here, like during a flow. And then I'm going to have to add another box and another box. And the queen will eventually start working her way up, but that's okay. I've allowed them to use as much of this as they can to grow their population as large as the colony and the queen feel that they need to, without having to do all that manipulation that I normally do because of the way I was trained or the way that I read or watched in other videos. So I'm trying to mimic nature here by not taking away or swapping things around. Now you may ask yourself, this box down here, when I put it on and it was empty last winter, isn't that a waste? Isn't that giving them extra space to keep warm? Well, no, because as you know, heat rises. They went into winter in these 2 boxes. Their heat rose. This was never a cold space for them that disturbed the winter cluster. And I know that because they survived. No, in fact, this created more of a buffer from the cold than if it was sitting directly on the bottom board right there. So not only did it help create a buffer from cold, in my opinion, but it also made them aware, oh yeah, we've got this much comb to work with, just like they would in the cavity of a tree. So that's just some thoughts when you're thinking about how to manipulate your colonies, how you want to structure them. Do it the way you want to, whatever way feels good to you, what you're used to. But I just want to suggest possibly trying to take 1 or 2 of your colonies and trying it the way that it would work out in nature without having a beekeeper manipulate those boxes around the way we're so used to. So That's what I got for you guys today. Love to hear what you think in the comments below. I appreciate you guys watching today, and I'll see you in the next video.